Can't hear you. On mute.
Hello. Yeah, I was trying to do something, but I don't know
There
how
it
to
is.
do it properly.
There's 3 people. What's going on, gentlemen? Welcome,
Your game
everybody,
over
to
on Twitch
episode.
is incorrect.
Oh no, it should be good now. You should no, it automatically changes.
Okay.
Yeah, it
It said
automatically
it said
changes.
you
You
were
don't. You
streaming
don't.
Madison, so
I
I
was
was
streaming that
confused.
yesterday.
Okay.
Um, I am going to change the go live. The only thing I have to change is the go live notification. There's Zeus. What are you doing, Zeus? Welcome on in. Tonight we're talking about witches. What do you gentlemen know about witches? Do you know any personal witches?
Not really anyone personal that I would consider to be a witch.
I have known and do know several people who claim some witchery.
Witchery, is that a word?
Yes, it is now. Every week I'm going to invent a new word.
You're gonna see if they'll put it in the dictionary. Probably the
Might as
Urban
well.
Dictionary.
They got everything else. Might as well. I mean,
Oh,
they got yeet in the regular dictionary now.
Oh
The word
no.
yeet.
is that acceptable?
No, it's
It is
not.
now, apparently.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. It is in the actual, official dictionary of things.
Boo.
That's okay. You know what? It's all right. It's okay. It's okay. Anyways, welcome into another episode of This Uncanny Earth, the weekly podcast that takes you into the amazing world of the unknown. It is spooky month. It is October. It's time for all the spookiness your little behinds can handle. So each week we're going to be doing something spooky, which will culminate into
Booger Hope.
I got to check the last date here. I think it's like 20, let's see, 31st. 31st. So Halloween night, we will be doing a live podcast. We'd always do a live, but we're all going to download GhostTube, and we're all going to sit around and we're going to talk to GhostTube and see if there's any spooky spirits in the house, in our houses.
Nice.
And we got a couple guests. I got a couple guests lined up, so we're all just going to sit around and do that. So I hope you guys are all ready for that. But yeah, let's get into this thing. So a witch is a person thought to have magic powers, especially evil ones, popularly depicted as a woman wearing a black cloak, a pointed hat, and of course flying on a broomstick. Now, obviously, that isn't what the case is. When it comes to witches, that's just, the old popular pop culture folklore aspect. And I always wonder where the broom and where the pointed hat came in. I was always curious about that one. So, yeah. The term itself is derived from Old English terms Wicca and Wiki, which are both masculine and feminine uses of the word, with Wicca being the male equivalent to a man who practices magic, and Wiki being the female equivalent to a woman who practices witchcraft or magic. Now, Wicca is a word that first appeared in the laws of Alfric in 890, and that, once again, means man practicing witchcraft. One of the earliest occurrences of a witch comes from the biblical book 1 Samuel. Now, in 1 Samuel, King Saul seeks the counsel of the witch of Endor, which is kind of hilarious because it's not, Star Wars.
The
But
Weeoks were involved in this segment.
right. It's to conjure up the dead spirit of the prophet Samuel to aid in the defeat of the Philistine army. The witch was able to make contact with Samuel, and then Samuel proceeded to predict the death date of King Saul. So there you earliest. Oh, I did not know that the hat came from the Druids. Now, if somebody would tell us where the broomstick comes from, is that because you have to have a clean house before you can do magic?
It's because a lot of witches were just naggy housewives.
Ooh, now we're getting canceled.
Uh-oh.
We're getting canceled.
He's coming with the fire. He's got shots fired right now.
He does. He put it. He put
There.
the dragon breath shells into the shotgun today.
Oh, try that.
So that just makes everybody sick. So, gentlemen, what do you know about witches? What do you? We'll start with Steven. Steven, you just got unfollowed.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it happens.
So I know that a lot of people would accuse. Hold on, let me fix my camera. Here, you all get to see where I
This is
am now.
mad unprofessional. I'm gonna
I know,
unfollow this
right?
channel.
There, you can see where I live.
This is
Look
like
at how
something you'd
ugly it
see on
is.
that dream
Terribly
show
ugly.
in the
I
night.
hate it. So, yes, what I know about witches is a long time ago, they would accuse people of being a witch just because they were being naggy housewives or they didn't like somebody. You could get accused of being a witch for just about anything, and it was typically women that would be accused of being a witch the most. Although it wasn't exclusively women, sometimes it would be men, but typically it was people of the lower class, and they would get accused of witchcraft. And then in some areas, they might try to drown the witch and see if she floats or not. And if she floats and comes back up, then she's a witch. But if she doesn't float, then she, doesn't come back up, and you know what happens then. And they excuse it because they're like, well, she's in heaven now, so it's all okay. And
Fields,
they have
what's up,
the
Fields? Welcome,
broomstick
welcome.
thing, like you said. Sometimes they portray them as riding on broomsticks. But
Mhm.
my understanding is that more modern witches. My understanding is they're more into like herbs and natural remedies and stones and stuff like that.
They're an asparagus.
Yes.
I have a massive amount of real world factual information. So you may want to save me for the end because I'll probably go on for a while,
Oh,
or
nice.
I can just take up most of the show now.
You know that I have no problem with either, to be honest with you.
I'm just giving the options because people like choices.
No, I figured this would be your show anyways. I figured I'd let you run wild,
Um,
brother.
Part of the reason is because I am a descendant
Oh, here we go again. This is
of
as
a
bad as me.
self-proclaimed
This is as bad as me
witchfinder
talking
general.
about. This is as bad as me talking about that I'm related to the.
Well, I don't bring this up at every possible occasion, so it's a
You
little
bring it up
different.
quite frequently, though.
But
I knew it. I made the face.
but there's a lot more information than just my being related. There's a lot of that this person did in a very short time, in 3 years, that caused a lot of long-term damage because the whole witchcraft accusation cycle kind of came and went a couple of times throughout this part of history. It started in England, and then once people migrated to the Americas, we had a resurgence here, of course, with the Salem witch trials and a lot of that kind of thing. And this was a direct, basically, link in how they did things because books that were written by these people involved were used as reference materials during some of the witch hunting here. Um, so the once again the self-proclaimed witchfinder general was a man named Matthew Hopkins, and he was never actually given the title by Parliament at the time. He was in England in an area known as East Anglia, and his career took place mostly during the English Civil War. Now, he had a partner, John Stern, and the two of them sent more accused people to be hanged for witchcraft than all other witch hunters in England of the previous 160 years, and were solely responsible for the increase in witch trials during those years. So he was pretty gung ho for it, but there were a couple reasons why, and you'll find out, and then you'll kind of be like, all right, that makes some sense.
Next week.
Um,
Next time on Dragon Ball Z.
Go
but
ahead.
they'd had some trials prior to his career starting, between 1612 and 1634. And after that, in 1644 is when he and his partner got involved. According to his book, The Discovery of Witches, Hopkins began his career as a witchfinder after he overheard women discussing their meetings with the devil in March of 1644. And this was, of course, hearsay, his own words there. His partner made the first actual accusations, and he was just an assistant at first, so he later surpassed his partner as the one in charge. 23 women, due to their efforts, were accused of witchcraft and were tried in 1645 alone. And they had justices of the peace end up presiding over the trials. So it wasn't even people who were necessarily like scholarly in the right area of law. It was more people who could just say yes or no and rubber stamp things for people. What they would do is they had a group of their own ladies with them that would travel with them, who would perform something called the pricking. Down, boys. They would take needles or sewing needles or like very pointy blades, and they would jab the suspected witch. And if they bled, then they were normal. And if they did not, they were supposed to be witches. Now I kind of have to wonder, like, what's the time frame there? Was it like, if you don't immediately bleed, like right after you're jabbed, you're obviously a witch because it takes the time for you to summon the blood. You know, they used that to their advantage, and they claimed to be officially commissioned by Parliament. Now this is half true. There was a lot of religious influence going on in the government at the time, and there had been other witch trials and things going on. So when they would pass through various counties, they had letters of safe travel that they could present to the people at those counties. Be like, yeah, we're allowed to come through here. You can't harass us and mess with us. We're legally able to do this. And the only way to get those, other than forge them, and there's no indication that they were forged, it was from Parliament. So, which is interesting because we'll get to that as I go on. Parliament was not particularly comfortable with everything that they did. They would travel with these ladies who would perform the pricking, and they would charge 20 shillings a town for their services, which were to maintain his company with 3 horses. Now they charged a town 23 pounds sterling, which is British pounds, which today, or as of 2023, would have been about 8 grand, give or take. So they charge 8 grand to go into a town and free it of its witches.
That's some inflation.
Why are we not doing this? Why are we not?
And this
Why are we
is
not doing
one
this?
of the things that stands out. It's kind of gives me an idea on what the motivation really was.
Money.
It was less, I think, fighting for the church and fighting the devil's servants, and more, we're gonna get ourselves some cash and we're gonna live it up. So the costs to the local communities were so burdensome that in 1645, which was the year that they had all those initial trials, a special local tax rate had to be levied in at least one of the counties to help the towns still survive because they were out of money. Parliament was well aware of him and his activities, and they had a special commission set up to actually oversee the trials and decide whether something actually somebody needed to be hanged or whatnot. And the newspapers all were kind of like, no, not too keen on everything that's going on, because his methods that he used, one of which was the swimming method that Stephen mentioned, throw them in the lake. Frequently, they were thrown in the lake while tied to a chair, because they figured, well, if you could break out of the chair and float and swim, obviously you're a witch.
What are they, Houdini?
I have a
Are they
question
Harry
though.
Houdini? Go
I
ahead,
have a
what's your
question.
Yes, you with the question.
If they could break out of the chair and get away after all that, what exactly did they think they could do to them after that?
They could make them some money. Is what they could
Yeah.
do.
Yep.
Another thing.
This sounds like a show we need to start doing and hitting the road. We need to hit the road, guys.
Another thing they would do is, in addition to just the pricking, they would also do the same thing with a blunt knife. They would try to cut your
Oh
arm
no.
with a blunt knife, and if you did not bleed, you were a witch. How blunt was the knife? Was it
Right.
blunter than a butter
Well,
knife?
Butter
Was it
and
like
knife? Yeah.
smooth?
I wanted to say earlier when you were talking about the prickening, um, how hard did they prick? Like if they didn't
Yeah.
like you, were they like, doop, oh, you didn't bleed, you're a
Oh,
witch.
no blood. Oh, yep, you're
Oh, too
obviously a
And I
bad,
witch.
you're a
mean,
witch.
there is
Sorry.
one type of witch that wouldn't bleed no matter what you did. A
You're gonna say so.
sandwich.
I knew you were gonna say something dumb.
He's fired.
You're fired.
Um,
Into a fire. We're gonna throw you into an
Yes.
actual fire at this
but
point.
They did that too.
now they did that. They did the pricking, and they did a few other things. But because torture was unlawful in England, technically by the law, he had to use these techniques and justify them in some fashion by, oh, well, if they were a witch, then they're not really a person, so you're not torturing a person, so it doesn't matter. And you're not actually putting the person on trial, you're putting the devil on trial, but you can't get a confession from the devil, so you have to get a confession from the people. So it was a lot of legal loopholey things to get that $8,000, basically. And of course they had the ladies that they would go with them who could tell a witch by the pricking, and they also believed that after they did that, it was believed that the witch's familiar, which was an animal such as a cat or dog, would then drink the witch's blood from the mark.
That's where black cats are unlucky came from.
I mean, a lot of our pets are technically predators,
Carnivores. Well, they're carnivores.
even though we
Yes.
feed them kibble and we feed them
Yeah.
whatever. But they're
Ooh.
carnivorous. They
I've
smell
heard
some
they'll
blood, they'll
eat
lick
you
it
if
up.
I'll heard they'll eat you if you don't move for too long.
Yeah, I've heard some stories about
Yeah.
cats that have started chewing on their owners if their owners have
Yeah.
passed and
Well,
things like
hey,
that.
it's free real
So,
estate. That's what I see it as. It's free real estate.
um, so this went on until 1647. So 3 years. He had a 3-year career before before they retired, probably because they were rich
Yeah.
and
Oh,
didn't have to do anything
this
else.
money's hurting my back. We need to take a break. All these
Um,
8,000s.
and some people asked them towards the end when it started to get out of hand. They said, "Well, with all these methods, didn't that make you guys witches yourselves because you would have to know the methods?"
Yeah.
But before that court went through, they had retired and gone off to live with their money, and nothing ever happened.
Oh.
So, and they both retired peacefully, apparently. Um,
In each
but
other's
again,
loving arms.
again, it was the influence of this that directly led to a lot of the methods and a lot of the issues that happened in New England after that in the colonies. Um, from 1647 to 48, upwards into the Salem witch trials, upwards all the way up through 1693. And so, yeah, it was a pretty gruesome legacy for somebody who was out basically to make a few bucks by getting rid of some quote unquote undesirables in the various towns.
I always wondered too if because we learned when we did the Salem episode that some of the so-called witches lived on property that had, veritable gold mines underneath them.
Hmm.
So they would get rid of them. Oh, their properties come up for auction. We'll take that property. And boom, now you're making hand over fist money. So a lot of it, I think, too, is property rights. If they're a witch, they don't deserve property. So you could just take their
Hmm.
property. So a lot of it was there too.
And the big thing was that the church condoned a lot of that because the church could always the church was in the business of buying
Yeah.
up property.
Eminent
They were buying up
domain,
real
basically.
estate for new churches, for
Mhm.
new cemeteries, for
Yeah.
new chapels, for all kinds of things. And their favorite targets were generally the ladies who still held on. Well, they were two kinds. There were the ladies who was a bit too rebellious, of course, as Stephen mentioned, people
Of
who
course.
eventually later on we would see that same sort of treatment resurface with the asylums
Yeah.
and
Yep.
the lobotomies. So it never really went
Trans-Allegheny.
away. It just
If
changed to fit the law at the time.
she's a naggin, she's gonna be brain a dragon.
But initially, a lot of the ones that weren't seen as troublemakers were people who might have been on property that they wanted, or were people who might
Yeah.
have had fortunes that could be seized because they were widows.
Yep.
And they were also ladies who generally worked a lot with plants and gardens and did faith
Yeah.
healing, because faith
Yeah.
healing was a very big thing, and that's something that has come forward from old world Ireland and Scotland and places of that nature, which is also where the broom thing comes from. It's a part of Celtic, I believe, because they still, up to that time, they still did a marriage ritual where if you're going to get married with somebody, you and the potential spouse would jump over the broom, and the maypole and various things of that. So the broom came about more because of that than because they figured that people were going to be riding them in the night, but just because they were identified in the same thing.
Imagine just riding like this is my wheel for the day. This is what we're gonna be driving around in.
And the image is stuck. Like it's the
Yeah.
popular. We see it not only in various spooky Halloween stuff, but we see it in like Harry Potter. They've got all the brooms and
Everything.
things, and the broom part of it has become larger than the legend by leaps and bounds, I
Yeah.
think.
Because I think what Fantasia, there's dancing brooms,
Yeah.
and one of the things
Sorcerer's
they're
Apprentice.
cleaning up the floor and all that jazz. Yeah.
Yeah, because he tries to use a spell to clean up because he doesn't want to do the cleaning, and it gets out of hand there.
I actually had something interesting I learned about witches.
Go ahead.
Back in the old times, like around like farming times when everyone farmed a lot, they actually called anything supernatural would technically be called a witch. Like if they didn't know what was going on, they would just automatically assume it was a witch. Which leads into the Bell Witch, which is what I was going to talk about.
Which is what he was going to talk about. Get it?
I
Yeah.
don't know which witch is which right now.
The sandwich.
Yes, that's my favorite. So, are you ready?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I gave you one big chunk. I'll probably
Okay. I
throw
wasn't
more
sure
in
if you were
later.
done. I didn't want to interrupt your thing.
I gotta let my throat calm down a
Okay.
little bit.
Okay, so I was looking into the Bell Witch a lot, and that took
He's
place
fired too.
that took place in Adams, Tennessee, and there was this family, the Bell family, and one night the dad saw a rabbit with a black mark on its foot, like a birthmark almost. And he didn't really think much of it at the time, but they went back home and, weird stuff started happening, like poltergeist stuff.
Yeah.
And so the son started getting attacked by the witch. The witch did not like him. And eventually, they didn't know what it was at first. And it kept going on. And for some reason, though, it was nice to the daughter, but it didn't want her to marry this other dude. So it would like harass her all the time and like, don't marry him. Don't marry him.
Wait a second. I don't mean to interrupt you.
Sorry.
Haven't we heard this somewhere before?
On this podcast. I think you
About
talked about it a long time ago.
I think it was a Middle Eastern tradition, like a jinn or something, that didn't want a lady to get married, so he killed off all the suitors.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
This sounds really familiar to me. Anyways,
Cask of
continue.
Amontillado.
What?
Cask of Amontillado.
Maybe I've been had too much Amontillado. No, it was something else. I'll have to look it up again. It was something where it kept killing off the suitors, and they had to do something to get. It could have been even Mesopotamian, but I know it was an old folk tale. Anyways, go ahead. My bad.
Okay.
I just wanted to interject.
Oh no, you're good. But so yeah, and it kept attacking the suitor, like you said, as you referred to him, and keeping him up all night, just being generally obnoxious. And at first, they were, they were a little bit annoyed, but they weren't very scared at first because it hadn't done anything overly violent. It hadn't hurt anybody. It was more like a trickster, So they were annoyed, and they eventually, over time, they came up with this tapping system. Like one tap for yes, two taps for no, the typical ghost type thing.
Mhm.
And they came to start asking it questions, and over time, they eventually said that it was the witch of uh Katie, I want to say. Do you remember? I honestly forgot the name. But anyways, it was the witch of a famous person in town who was known for being accused of being a witch and was actually really cruel to the children all the time. And other than that, the witch was cruel to the children all the time, and so that's why they thought that it might be that witch. But they also associated the events closely with Jeff the Mongoose. Yes, you heard that right. GEF, the mongoose, was another story somewhere halfway across the world that many people actually pointed out was very similar to the story of the Bell Witch, but that's a completely different thing. And I just wanted to mention that because, I mean, how can you not talk about Jeff the Mongoose?
Yeah, you got to bring up Jeff the Mongoose.
Yeah. But long story short, Jeff the Mongoose had eventually told everyone, yeah, I'm Jeff the Mongoose. And like there's no such thing as a talking mongoose, at least as far as we're aware. So everyone was like, oh, it's just messing with people. But anyways, back to the Bell Witch. So over time, it kept messing with people, and by the time it was all over, the suitor, well, they didn't make it through, to put it lightly. They didn't make it through the ordeal. And to this day, people still go to the cave that the Bell Witch was, said to hang out in. And they still go to the cave to this day. And they say if you take like a rock from the cave or the Red River nearby, then you'll get cursed or haunted and you'll get a lot of bad luck and bad things will happen to you.
Yeah, because people have been known to send it back
Yeah.
with like an apology letter. Now, what do you make of that? Do you think that's legit, or do you think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy?
I think it could be a little bit of both. I think some instances it might be actually, causing the bad luck. And then in other instances, it might be psychosomatic.
What do you think, Spider?
It's a tough call. I generally assume a lot of that stuff is kind of once the thought gets in your head that it's possible,
Yeah.
Agreed.
then things just kind of go on from there. Because I always wonder how often people have done tests where, oh, hey, let's go to this cave. I'm not going to tell you anything about the legend here. I don't want you to look it up or anything like that. Let's just
Yeah.
go here, and here you take a stone from here and go home with it. And then if the person doesn't actually look it up and doesn't get involved with it, if something is going to happen to them or not. Now, certain things, like, of course, things like the Hope Diamond have done their damage, whether you believed in it or not,
Right.
to pretty much everybody. And it's one of those things where you can't disprove it, but you can't prove it either. And it just, people have always had the bad luck. It's never spared anybody, basically, if it's been outside of wherever it's at. I think it's in a museum now or something like that, some kind of
Right.
private collection where people don't get access to it. But it's very similar to other things, like you've got Robert the Doll, you've got the
Yep.
chair, you've
Annabelle.
got,
Annabelle.
yeah, all these different things that if you didn't know anything about them, if there was if there was a way to completely insulate you from whatever the stories were, would something still happen to you?
That's the thing, I think, as well, as just it's something along those lines.
No, I mean, some things do have their own like energies and stuff like that too. Like some things will kind of get you thinking and get you wondering, regardless of whether you hear a story or not. But that's pretty specific circumstances.
Right, right. And I think too, you just have to be careful with what you're dealing with. Like I said, I don't think it's always like that. I do think a majority of them are self-fulfilling prophecies. Um, but at the same time, I just you got to take you got to take each case by case basis. I don't think you can lump them all into one case. if
Yeah.
that
Well,
makes
there's a
sense.
lot of different
Yeah.
circumstances, and there's a lot of different, and again, there's different legends, and there's different, too many variables, to be perfectly honest. I don't think
Now,
anybody's ever done a really thorough study on it.
what I want to get into now is the Malleus Maleficarum.
Ooh.
This was published by two German Dominicans, and the book itself is translated as the Hammer of Witches. Now, I'm sure your relative probably learned from that because it was first published in 1486.
Isn't that like the ultimate witch book?
Yeah, the Ultimate
Yes.
Witch Hunter's Guide, more or less.
Okay.
So this was printed in 1486 in the city of Speyer in Germany, and the book labeled witchcraft as a heresy. Oh well, that's oh no, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And became the guidebook for Catholics and Protestants on how to expose witches that lived among men. For over 100 years, the book was a top seller, and the only book that beat it. I'll give you guys a guess. What book do you think would beat this one?
Bible.
Yep, correct. Now the main section of this book, The Hammer of Witches, is broken down into three different sections. The first section examines witchcraft from a theoretical standpoint. Natural philosophy and theology are the tools with which witchcraft's validity would be measured. It also addresses the question of witchcraft being real or imaginary. Now, the conclusion states that witchcraft must be real because the devil is real. And what happens is witches enter into a pact with the devil to perform black magic, and thus the link between witches and the devil is created. Now, the second section, it deals more with the practice, actual cases, powers, and recruitment strategies of witches. It discusses that it's mostly witches who recruit for the devil by making something go wrong in a person's life. So then that person has to come to the witches or come to somebody of that nature to make sense of everything. And once they come in, obviously that ends up turning into a process of conversion. And so you have another one added to the ranks. The section then goes on to discuss how witches cast spells and remedies that can be taken to prevent or aid those afflicted by witchcraft. Now, the third and final section deals with the legal aspect of how to persecute a witch. It lays out how magistrates prosecute witches, and it describes step-by-step guide to the conduct of a witch trial, the method of initiating the process, assembling accusations, interrogation, and we'll put this in quotations, including torture of witnesses, not just the witches themselves, but of witnesses. um, and the charging of the accursed. Side note, women who do not cry during their trials are automatically thought to be witches.
Because they know their guilt and they know that they're guilty, so they're not. That's a good joke. We can't put that up there because it's supposed to be more or less family friendly. But it's a good joke.
Yeah, it's not bad. Not bad. Not a bad one. So, yeah, I've never read this book. I wouldn't mind getting a copy of it just to read through it. I'm sure it's public domain.
Yeah, it's also because it's of the time it was written. It's pretty dense. It's got a lot of flowery language. And
You're good, Alpha. It's all good.
it's like any old book that borders on religious text because that's what it relied on for a lot of its justification. It relied on a lot of religious background and a lot of religious stories to justify what they did and what they were going to do and how to do the trials and all that other kind of thing. Um, and it did definitely inform the later books by Matthew Hopkins, which is the Discovery of Witches, as far as that a witch basically doesn't have any legal rights,
Right.
and it sets out the reasons why in a lot of loopholey ways. So it's still the most cited work generally up until the witch finding craze kind of died down a little bit.
Right, right, because witches kind of went underground after a period of time. There was all the sensation wasn't really there anymore. I think you have that once you have science taking its proverbial place in society. A lot of the witchcraft trials and things like that were pretty much done away with because you had men of science. So they just, instead of looking at it as a threat, they just looked at it as, okay, that's make believe. It's
There
nonsense.
was also a lot of outcry because a lot of people were executed in a
Innocent
relatively
people,
short,
innocent
a
people.
relatively short amount of time. Each instance was a burst of just you must be a
Yeah.
witch. You must be a
Yep.
witch. Oh, everybody that you know that likes you is a witch.
Yeah.
Everybody that likes them is a witch. Anybody else want to speak up? Oh, you're all witches too.
And also, although it was more rare and less common, I did hear every once in a while a noble would even get accused.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because
Landowners.
Yeah,
if you have political enemies, what better way to
exactly.
remove your political enemy by saying they're a witch?
I
They
even
have
heard a
they
story
have this on their property.
where the husband tried to save the wife and they just couldn't afford it. Like they just couldn't afford the bill.
Because a
Yeah.
lot of it was money involved because you had to
Yeah.
Yeah.
pay fees to get people out of jail, you had to pay fees to
Yeah.
file whatever. The Templars, um, basically is it's a similar situation. The Templars were all accused of heresy and consorting with the devil and hunted
Mhm.
down and executed for the most part. Even if most of them, even several of them confessed, and they're like, "Oh well, since you're guilty, see you later." Boom.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they
Yeah.
seized their funds, they seized their
Lands.
lands, they
Yep.
seized everything that made them powerful because that was the point. Because it was the same tradition. It was a
Yep.
very
Yeah.
similar pathway to what they had done with cases of supposed witchcraft.
Yeah, of course. Because what better way to take from your enemy than just call him a witch? And the fervent belief at the time of people just going crazy at the thought of that being a thing. Because all it takes is a child to go missing, or somebody to get mauled by a bear, or something crazy to happen, and they're like, oh well, that witch brought the bear into town, or
An
that witch, or
outbreak of
famine, or drought, or anything of that nature could be blamed
an
Or
on a
like
person.
outbreak
a
of
witch's
like
familiar could be a grizzly bear for all we know.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And he
well,
comes in and
tuberculosis and whatever.
Yeah.
TB, look at it as a punishment. So yeah, and some of the witches, they reveled in it.
Like with
Some of them,
Abigail Hobbs in Salem.
yeah, yeah. Some of the more mentally unhinged folks, they reveled in it. They were like, yeah, we are witches, and blah 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 blah, and that just put the fervency to a higher pitch. But then they find out that Salem witch trials were just made up. Not the trials themselves, but the accusations were
Yeah.
made up.
Hmm.
Made up by
Because they were scared that they were gonna be accused, so they were and then other people were
yeah,
like, "Oh, you wanna accuse me of being that? Okay, I'll take you down with me."
And it was all
yeah.
because of a
Yep.
lady who's couldn't continue her affair with a married man in town, basically.
Yep.
I thought it was two daughters.
Yeah, it was the 2 daughters. They were the first ones to be
The two
afflicted.
daughters were the ones who started accusing people.
Yeah.
Mm. One of
The
them
ma
was
It was their
involved with like
maid,
the
wasn't it?
local guy or
I'm
something or
using
other.
maid loosely because, I don't wanna get us a strike, but
Yeah. Well, they
yeah.
started
Right.
off slow. They started off kind of like just accusing other people, but the whole goal was to get even with the guy who refused to leave his wife for
They
one of the
made a whole movie
girls.
about it, didn't they?
And
The Crucible?
Was it the
a few times,
Crucible?
yeah. That was there
They
was a
made us watch
book,
it
there
in
was a
high school.
play, there was a couple movies. Um, yeah, there's been a lot of recreations of the story.
Of course,
Yeah.
there's been plenty of horror movies where the witches come back and they want blood.
Netflix did their own interpretation of Sabrina.
Well, that's not good. I don't know what we do with that. Spider, what do you got for us? You said you had a laundry list.
Yeah, let me pull it back up here. I was gonna switch gears to modern witchcraft, which is not really witchcraft anymore because we're in a more, some would say we're a bit more enlightened. It
Mhm.
depends on which channel you're watching, I suppose. Um, Now, modern witchcraft has gone through a rebranding. Drink if you hear that word, that's the drinking game. Um,
Sorry.
and it's now Wicca, which is what it was technically based on the original language,
Yeah.
as Rob presented at the beginning of the
Mhm.
show. And it's an attempt to get back to study of the older ways, and a lot of the concept is pretty good. Like, it's interesting. Like, I'm not going to do it myself, but it is very interesting. It deals with nature, it deals with herbs, it gets back into kind of the faith healer, folk healer kind of area.
Mhm.
It's also really, really, for the most part, it's become a lot more diluted. Not
Yeah.
delusional diluted, but diluted as in like watered down.
Diluted.
Delulu.
Because I have met scores of people who say, "Oh yeah, I'm Wiccan and I do this and I do this,"
Right.
but they really don't do much in depth with it. It's just kind of an excuse to hang around with other ladies who have similar interests and to work with nature things and to kind of feel mildly spiritual fulfilled. And I don't want to insult anybody by saying that. It just doesn't really resemble what it's claimed to be or what it used to be. So it's kind of
No
I
voodoo
thought it was
dolls?
just I thought it was going to be a fad religion when it
That's what
first
I
had a
thought too.
resurgence several years ago. Well,
I remember
probably
this.
more than several years ago. It's been when
But
I
at
was a
least,
kid.
yeah, I
It
would
was
say at
really
least
coming back.
at least 20 years ago.
But it's held on, and more
Yeah.
people are attached to the idea. And some of the things written about it are very good. It gets down to herbs like the sage. It gets down into stones like rose quartz and various things of that nature. It gets into a lot of areas that are very new age, that have been carried forward from the Victorians, that are kind of the milder stuff. You got away from the seances, you got away from the table tapping, you got away from some of the more death oriented things and focused more on the more positive life, um, celebrating life kind of aspects of it.
And I've heard a lot of that actually works too.
Well, it
Yeah,
depends
because
on.
it's well, it just depends. Like, a
Yeah.
lot of the stuff it's like medicine women in Native American times, or it's like what was it? There was
A
a name
modern day
for them
pharmacist.
in the Appalachian Mountains. They had a name for him too. The
Shaman?
no,
No, there was something else. I know what you're
what
thinking of
was
too, and
that?
it's just escaping me.
But it was like a medicine healer, you know.
Mhm.
Granny witches. There was granny witches, and
And
what all that is, and not to interrupt you,
oh no, go ahead.
there it is. Yeah, James. Yeah. What that is basically is that's chemistry. That's a lot of chemistry. A lot of your stones is science because they've done scientific studies of what this stuff does to the body, your different herbal remedies and stuff, and they found like you put that on cuts, you put that on scrapes or abrasions or bruises or bumps, and it takes the swelling down because there's a natural chemical that occurs in these plants that interacts with the skin that's able to uh, decrease the swelling, um, helps with the appetite, helps with your stomach hurting. Some of them tasted terrible. Some of the poultices and potions and things tasted terrible, but they worked. And there was scientific documentation to prove that they worked because they had like this special chemical that we would go pay $8 for to get a bottle of at the store of vitamins that they just, it grew it grew in the forest and they would go picking and they would go find it and they would make make a salve out of it and then put it on the wound. Next thing you know, the wound's healed in a couple days. So a lot of people think that was just nonsense, but in reality, it was just a early form of chemistry and medicine before medicine was modern. They had to make do, and if you got to make do, you're gonna see what plants do what. I always wanted to see the first person who decided to eat mushrooms. Did they
Mhm.
trip? Did they die? Or did they just have a good meal? Because it was one of the three.
Mm.
It was definitely one of the
Mm.
three. So, but
And
yeah,
there is definite science, as you said, behind a
yeah.
lot of this stuff now. Because white sage, people talk about, oh, the smudging to chase away
Mhm.
the spirits and whatnot. White sage when you burn it, it actually has an effect on the chemical composition of the air. It deals
Mhm.
with negative ions,
Yep.
and I was pretty surprised. Like I didn't know that. I'd known about smudging. I'd known about all that, but and this was on something when I did my mini series. I did Saturday Spiritualist for
Mhm.
the channel here. You guys can all go back and watch that at your
Or you
leisure.
could make new episodes.
I don't know. You don't want to beat something so into the ground
No,
that there's not much more
we
to
got to
talk
get
about.
into our
But
philosopher's corner. We got to get into the
Yes.
philosopher's corner. That's what's up next. So we can all just blabber on for an hour.
yeah, the white sage it's actively does clean your air and improve your air quality, and it helps you think
Mhm.
more clearly, and it helps you breathe more clearly. And so when you're chasing away the negativity, you're kind of like literally chasing away the
Yeah.
negativity after a fashion.
Yeah.
Um, so and that's very surprising. And there are a lot of instances of that in modern quote unquote witchcraft or Wicca, depending on what you want to label it. You kind of have to sift through some things though, because there are a lot of things that are claimed, like there are certain stones that are these stones will connect you with your guardian angels, and these will do this and these will do that. I know it sounds like I'm being kind of mocking, and I don't want people to be upset about it. I think
But
that's kind of out there,
but
but
some of it is hokey. Some of it is hokey, I think.
mm,
Personally. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I definitely think some of it's hokey. Um But I definitely think some of it makes sense. Some of your stones are precious metals and things of that nature, and they have a certain property about them,
mhm,
right? Stones have a certain property. People want to admit or not, they do have a certain property. They resonate at a certain frequency. They fall apart at a certain frequency. It's all frequency based science. But in terms of like being able to communicate with my guardian angel, I don't know about that.
mhm.
That's where I kind of draw the
Your
line.
spirit guides and
Right,
things, and
right,
I'm
right,
kind of like,
right.
a lot of that too is that speaking from my experience, I've never had that kind of a communication with an otherworldly being, to
Same.
be honest. Like I can't say that I've ever had a prayer when I was younger that was something that was spoken back to me. And that doesn't
Mhm.
invalidate people who pray or do praying
Right.
and
No,
whatnot,
right,
because
right.
a
You're
lot of
right.
the
You're
theory
right. You're
behind
right.
that is that it's not a spoken thing anyway, it's a
Yeah.
feeling or whatever. I've
Mhm.
never gotten responses from there. I've never had anything otherworldly try to speak to me through stones, through herbs, through trees, through
Same.
whatever. Now, does that mean that it doesn't talk to people? No. It
Yeah,
just
I
means it doesn't
agree.
talk to me. But
I
because
agree.
I only have myself, I only have my observations to go
Yep.
by.
Yeah, that's a tough one because while it's possible, much like you, I don't commune with things that are outside of my realm. Um, have things happen to me that I can't explain regarding those kind of things? Sure, sure. But in terms of like, being like, yeah, I'm gonna pull out my headphone case and it's the spirit of so and so inside of my no, it's nothing like that. I think a lot of the times it's your subconscious just kind of speaking out to you, kind of not speaking out to you, but like you're involving your self-conscious in a way. Um, because you and also to be fair, you don't know what you're talking to. There's a lot of
Mhm,
negative forces out there that would seek to undermine you. So you got to be real careful with stuff like that. I don't dwell on that in that plane of existence because you never know what you're gonna bring back when you're talking something like this. Just some FYI.
mhm. So, witchery. Um, just to throw it
Tomfoolery.
out there, anybody out there who has experience in witching, or maybe you consider yourself a Wiccan or an old style witch or whatever, by all means, you can put a comment on this video on YouTube, or
Mhm.
you can send us an email if you'd rather stay anonymous. You don't
Yeah.
have to put your business out there if you don't want to, and we will keep you anonymous if you ask. We wouldn't mind bringing up some stories if you have them on a future episode of the show.
Now, I recently got an email from an anonymous person that I will not name because I respect their privacy. And we're going to be talking about what they sent me next week, right here on this Uncanny Earth, but they were very much adamant about their anonymity, and I think that is top notch. So we here will honor your anonymity. So if you come to us and you're like, "Hey, tell this story, but I don't want my name used," we will always, 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 always protect your privacy. If you are going to share with us something that's very personal to you, and you don't want to put your name out there, say less. Your name isn't going out there. If you want to put your name out there, we'll do that too. So
Or if you want to be on the show and talk about your experiences, definitely let us
yeah,
know, and
yeah,
we'll schedule you to be on.
yeah, yeah. We've had some great guests in the past that can vouch for us. We'll have to get James Boggs back in here one of these times. Now that Steven's a part of the show, live laughing and loving or whatever. I don't know. So, gentlemen, you got anything else before we call it a night?
How about the Blair Witch?
Go ahead, hit us with it.
All right. This one, it might be real, it might not. I've
Mhm.
actually seen conflicting things. But apparently it happened in Burkittsville, Indiana. And they say that a group of students were filming a documentary and they went on some missing kids, and then they also went missing.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where, and then they the family found some documentarians and they sent them out, to recover the footage, and they found the lost footage and they got it back, and what they recovered from the lost footage they turned into the Blair Witch Project, the
Mm-hmm.
original film that was released whenever it was released, back in the day. And so I actually was wondering about that, and I was wondering what you guys thought, if you thought it was actually something that actually happened, or if it was one of those things where they just built up a bunch of drama to try to sell the movie.
They built up a bunch of drama. There was a
Yeah.
whole show on Sci-Fi
Oh,
about
okay.
how they did it. So yeah,
Like
it
War of
was
the
basically
Worlds.
yeah, it was kind of like that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was cool. I saw it in the theater.
Yeah.
I saw it at the theater the day it came out because I'm like, what is this?
And like it's
I was
gone so
intrigued.
far too, because now they got the
Yeah.
games and all
The
the other
game's
mediums.
fun. The
Yeah.
second movie's a bit weird because it really doesn't have a lot to do with the first.
Yeah.
But the new movie was good. I saw the new movie too, and it was pretty fuego fire.
It did really kickstart that found footage kind of
Yeah.
Yeah, which
That's
I
what a lot
enjoy.
of
I
craze.
people
like
said.
found footage movies.
I'm not usually a big fan. I mean,
He's not.
sometimes you get some good ones coming out, but it's gone a lot of weird directions. Like you started with
Yeah.
Blair Witch, but then you also have like the one where they had the hidden cameras in the hotel, and there was the
Yeah.
infection or something like that.
I thought it was a cabin, but
Well, there's a couple of different movies. One of
yeah.
them, that's Cabin Fever. This is a
Ah.
found footage one where they're like in a hotel or something like that. And
Because there's
I only remember part of
Cloverfield.
the.
Cloverfield was
There's
one of them.
Cloverfield too. Yeah, that's
Paranormal
another.
Activity's another
Possible.
one. There was a really good one. What was it called? It was about Chernobyl, and that was a found footage one. That was a good
Mm.
one.
Wreck?
What?
Was it Wreck?
No,
REC?
I think it was just called Chernobyl.
Yeah, something like that. Because I remember when that came out.
Because I enjoy found footage films. I do. They're some of my favorites. But Cloverleaf made people sick, I guess, in the theater because of the shaky cam. Yeah,
Ah.
people were getting sick in the theater.
That also led to the where they used a combination of live like found footage and it was like the documentary style movie, like District 9
Yeah.
and some of
God,
those which were done really well as
Thank
well.
you,
Godzilla was
James.
kind of like that too. The 2014 Godzilla, the one
Yeah,
that Gareth Edwards, that was kind of like that as well.
because you
So
hardly saw the monster fights. Like
a
you didn't
buddy at
see
work,
hardly
he
any of it
hated
till
that.
later.
He hated that movie, but I thought that's what made it good. Is you see glimpses of him in
Hmm.
that part where they're ODST dropping out of the sky, and they see him. That was so freaking cool. I like that.
Better than the most recent one, I'll say that.
I didn't see Godzilla versus Kong.
Well, this was the new Empire. The new Empire, the CGI looks really bad, and it's just
I
I
like
don't
the
know.
Godzilla movie that
It's
took place
it's
in Japan.
Oh,
minus
Shin
one.
Godzilla, either
I don't
-1
know.
or
It was the
Shin.
newer one from like the
Yeah, it
last
was
Minus
two or
one.
three
-1.
years.
It was -1.
Yes, that's the one. They
Yeah,
actually
Because they
spoke
used
Japanese and
the
everything.
modern Godzilla
yeah,
that looked really good, not the
Yeah,
man in
I
the
like
suit.
that
yeah.
one. I did not like the Godzilla versus Kong or whatever that was.
I'll have to
Um,
watch it. I watch them all, so like now that it's been out for a while, I'll just
Yeah.
give it a glance. Anyways, gentlemen, it's time to go for the night. I hope everybody had a good night. Spider, I hope you have a good night. Steven, I hope you have a good night. What do you two gentlemen have coming up? Spider, what do you got coming up?
well, I'm going to be still streaming probably within the next hour or so. I'm continuing my playthrough of the Final Fantasy series. I'm still on Final Fantasy 2
That's
because
a slog. I'll tell you now, it's a
it
slog.
is, and apparently I've approached it in the complete wrong
Yeah,
way because I
it's
turned
about
on the
jobs.
boosts
It's about
and
jobs.
yeah, but I've got everything like way overdone. I've
Yeah, you're
gone
not supposed to do that.
overboard
Yeah,
on everything, so it's
yeah,
like I've got too many choices all the
One-shotting all the
time.
enemies.
yeah,
I have
yeah.
no idea. Like I've done too much, and there's no going back. So I'm gonna try to plow through the rest of the story for that and just try to finish it because now I think I'm just bogged down in a swamp of like over leveling every single thing.
Right,
But I'm doing
right.
that. Steven, what's next for your show?
What's going on for you,
Uh,
buddy?
Next, I am going to talk about the Tong Monk in my Journey to the West series on
Ah,
Saturday. And
all
that
right.
is the one, surprisingly, that is actually the main character of Journey to the West, not Sun Wukong.
Okay, okay. I'll be playing some more Madison. To keep going on my Spooktober Spook Duke adventures.
Is that one of the
Um,
scary games?
yeah, love them, love
Yep.
them. So Madison, we'll probably stream Tesla versus Lovecraft,
Wait,
and
what?
yeah, yeah,
Oh, we gotta see that.
yeah. It's pretty
It's
cool
goofy.
actually.
It's a bit
It's
on the
it's
goofy
a
side, but
it's
it's a
like
fun ride.
it's a horde mode game. It's like
Oh,
Brotato.
nice.
It's like
Nice.
Brotato. Yeah, that's about it, man. Freak out. That's it. All right, gentlemen. Well, for me, Spider, Steven, and the whole Uncanny crew, why be boring when you can be uncanny? We will see you cats, you hip cats, next week. Y'all be good, y'all. Peace.